28 Days Later is not just a movie to me. It's not even just a horror film. It's a cultural reset, a genre-defining gut punch that dragged zombie fiction out of the grave and slapped it in the face. And it worked. This thing changed everything. It was primarily shot digitally on a prosumer Canon XL1 digital camera, and we'll take a closer look at the unique production later in this video, and yet, it was a box office beast, an atmospheric fever dream, a psychological war zone, and now, 2 decades later, we are finally getting 28 years later. So I figured it was time to go back, revisit the chaos, and figure out how we went from lightning in a bottle to whatever the hell 28 weeks later was. Now, a quick disclaimer before the knives come out, I'm a 28 Days Later defender until the bitter end. You could strap me to a hospital bed, leave me in a rage-infested London, and I'll still be yelling about how this movie is the gold standard for modern horror. And not just because of the fast zombies, but because of what it meant, what it said. This was our generational apocalypse, visceral, intimate, and unrelenting. In 2002, back when the idea of a fast zombie was considered a war crime by purists, Danny Boyle came along to break the internet, and he did. Before this, zombies shuffled, they groaned, they awkwardly grabbed at you. But here, they run, they leap, they scream, they bleed into your eyes. These weren't just zombies, they were human rage incarnate. But the brilliance wasn't just in the infected, it was in the collapse. This wasn't about just surviving, it was about the cost of surviving. About losing your soul to hold onto your skin, the empty streets, the grainy handheld visuals, the twisted color palette. It didn't just feel real, it felt wrong, like we weren't supposed to be watching, and that's how you do horror. But then came 28 weeks later, and oh boy, where do I even start? Actually, you know what, scratch that. Where do I even stop? Because this sequel didn't just drop the ball, it fumbled it. It trips over it, it sets it on fire, and then uses the ashes to paint the walls of mediocrity. Every ounce of raw, nerve-shredding tension from the original, gone, replaced with jump cuts and Jeremy Renner. The quiet dread of 28 Days Later, traded for action scenes and studio interference that practically seeps off the screen. This isn't a sequel, it's a parody with a straight face. It came in swinging with a bigger budget, a flashier cast, and nothing else. Just vibes and missed opportunities. 28 weeks later is the cinematic equivalent of buying a Ferrari and then crashing it into a wall because you didn't read the manual. The direction, soulless. The script, dumbed down to the point of insult. The themes, it felt like they skimmed the Wikipedia page for the first film and just started shooting. So where did it all go wrong? We'll break it down. We'll get into the style, the tone, the characters, or lack thereof, and why this series went from revolutionary to relic in the span of one misstep. Sit back, grab a bat, and double check your escape routes. We're diving into the nightmare, the rise, and the fall of the 28 Days Later franchise. Right, let's talk about Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later, because this is one of those movies that had absolutely no right being as smart as it was. Now, Boyle does something here that at the time was almost revolutionary. He shows you point blank the reason the rage virus got out. And it's not some shadowy cabal of scientists accidentally dropping a vial. In his film, it's a group of eco-activists. You know the type, they're trying to save nature, but with their good intentions, they basically pave the road to hell for the entire country. And let's be honest, you add our own little real-world pandemic to the mix, where nobody can agree on how it even started, and 28 Days Later starts to feel eerily prescient. But that's not all. Boyle also perfected a trope that would become legendary. Yeah, Robert Kirkman gets the credit with The Walking Dead, but it was Boyle a full year earlier who came up with the genius opening of a main character waking up from a coma into the middle of an apocalypse. And our hero isn't just some jacked up super soldier or a grizzled cop. He's Jim, a courier who had the misfortune of getting hit by a car. He didn't see the world fall. He didn't see people eating each other. He just wakes up to silence. He sees, probably for the first time in his life, a completely empty London buried in trash. And because we see it through his eyes, we're right there with him. The whole thing is shot on these gritty consumer-grade DV cameras with that sickly yellow filter, and it just creates this insane feeling of realism. Sometimes you forget you're actually watching a movie. It feels more like you've stumbled across some horrific real-world chronicle. Now, for a movie with this much blood, tension, and sheer terror, what really got me, and what I think is the most brilliant part, is its focus on the human element. The characters Boyle creates are alive. They get real introductions, real moments, Nobody here is just cannon fodder to be killed off for a cheap jump scare. We learn something significant about every single one of them before they check out, whether it's Mark and Selena at the very beginning, or Frank, or even those soldiers at the end. And that brings me to the absolute heart of the film, the makeshift family of Jim, Selena, and Frank with his daughter Hannah. These aren't just characters, you get attached to them fast. You genuinely feel it when one of them is in danger. Take this absolute gem of a man, Frank. Even in this hellscape, he's desperately trying to keep a shred of normalcy for his daughter. He's stringing up Christmas lights in an abandoned flat, using fancy glasses for a drink, and he's still trying to be a gracious host. He forces a smile for these strangers, these people who mean nothing to him, because that's a piece of the old world, the normal world, and it's desperately important for him to hold on to that. He's even embarrassed that they have to all piss in the same bucket and just dump it off the balcony. These tiny little details from Boyle make you genuinely start to worry about these people. Then you have Selena. For most of the film, she's the voice of this new brutal reality. On the surface, she's ready to go full Terminator, to cut anyone loose if they are a liability. She even tells Jim straight up, if they're a burden, I'll leave them behind. And to prove her point, she doesn't hesitate to hack her friend to pieces the second he might be infected, without even being 100% sure. You have to become a demon to survive a world full of demons. But here's the kicker, she talks a big game, but it's a front. It's a shield she's built to survive. Because if you stick with the film till the very end, you realize the real demons aren't the infected ones running around screaming, they're the ones who look perfectly normal, the ones we're supposed to trust. So, let's start with the basics. The title, 28 Days Later, isn't just some random number they pulled out of a hat for a cool sounding title. It's actually tied to the common belief that it takes about 28 days for the human body to build up peak immunity to a virus, which is a concept that's woven into the film's timeline. Straight off the bat, you can tell they were thinking. And it's clear the filmmakers understood the assignment when it comes to their influences. They didn't just rip off other movies, they cherry-picked some of the greatest apocalyptic ideas ever. You've got the main character waking up in a deserted hospital from the day of the Triffids, the last man on Earth vibes from the Omega Man as Jim wanders through an empty London. And even nods to Romero's classic with the shopping spree scenes from Dawn of the Dead and the chained up infected from Day of the Dead. Like they took the best parts of the genre's history and used them to build something new. Just cinema. But now let's get into the real meat and potatoes of what makes this movie so special, because this is where things get really interesting. Boyle brought on a cinematographer named Anthony Dodd Mantle, who was basically a pioneer of shooting feature films on consumer digital video. And for 28 Days Later, they shot the bulk of the film on consumer-grade Canon XL1 digital cameras. Let that sink in. A major theatrical film shot on cameras you could probably buy at your local electronics store. It's a move that should have been a complete disaster. But Boyle and Mantle knew exactly what they were doing. The script was violent, it was messy, it was chaotic. So what did they do? They gave it a look to match. That wasn't a mistake. It was by very definition the entire point. The result was this incredible, dirty aesthetic that just feels raw and real. It plunges you right into the chaos. You don't feel like you're watching a polished Hollywood blockbuster. You feel like you're right there with Cillian Murphy, running for your life with a shaky cam that feels like a home video from hell. And this decision wasn't just for artistic merit, it was also just plain smart. These smaller cameras gave them the freedom to shoot on the run, guerrilla style, getting angles and shots that would have been impossible with massive 35mm film cameras. It was also, let's be real, way cheaper, which allowed them to do some truly insane stuff on a tight budget. Which brings us to those iconic, haunting shots of a completely deserted London. I mean, how did they even do that? Well, it was what they called a technical nightmare. The crew would get out there at the crack of dawn, use up to 10 cameras at once, and basically beg the police for these tiny 90-second to 2-minute windows to shut down major landmarks like Westminster Bridge. Like, are you kidding me? The level of planning and sheer audacity to pull that off is just mind-blowing. They literally stole the shot of the bus at Downing Street by just stopping it in the middle of the road at 4 a.m., filming for 15 minutes, and then driving off. And my favorite detail, which is just peak problem solving, is that Boyle would strategically place attractive and charming women from the crew to go and calm down angry drivers during the roadblocks. That's not just directing, that's 4D chess. The art department also did their job so well covering Westminster Bridge in convincing debris that a government worker actually tried to clean it all up. And if that's not a sign you absolutely nailed the look, I don't know what is. Even the birds flying around in those empty city scenes were a last-minute addition. The team just decided on the fly that the virus wouldn't have killed them, and it ended up looking beautifully weird on screen. It just goes to show that sometimes the best moments aren't planned, they're just happy accidents that add to the film's gritty realism. So when you look at all of these little details, you realize 28 Days Later isn't just a great movie, it's a blueprint for how to use your limitations to your advantage and create something truly iconic. It's a testament to ingenuity, smart decision making, and a little bit of tactical charm to deal with angry London drivers. So let's talk about characters and plot. I've got to say, when you look back at the zombie genre, like I said in the beginning of the video, it's filled with archetypes. You've got your grizzled soldier, your hardened cop, your brilliant scientist, but then you have 28 Days Later, and its introduction to Jim is, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant and bold choices in the history of the zombie genre. He wakes up completely naked in a deserted hospital. This immediately strips him of everything, not just his clothes, but his identity and status. It makes him look so unbelievably lost and vulnerable, and it sets a tone that is just so unique. Now, context for this character, Jim is a bike courier. This adds a layer of realism and relatability that most of these stories just completely miss. An everyman, an ordinary person thrown into circumstances that are just insane. It makes his journey so much more compelling because he's one of us. And his first desperate cries of hello into the empty streets of London, it just transforms a simple greeting into this profound, haunting plea for connection. It's not just a question, it's a cry into the void, and that initial silence is the only answer he gets. His journey takes him to a church, which at face value might seem random, but this is actually a profound and unique objective. In a world with no answers, he instinctively seeks out a place of guidance, a place where he might find a fatherly figure to make sense of this new, terrifying world. This isn't just about survival, it's about a search for meaning, and I love that. What's great is that Jim's initial naivety and optimism serve as this taste of the old world. He's a stark contrast to Selina's ruthless, almost nihilistic survivalism, and it sets up one of the most compelling character dynamics I've seen. And then you have these flashing Christmas lights that Jim spots. It's kind of like a powerful symbol. In the middle of this apocalypse, it's a glimmer of hope, a small piece of the old world still trying to shine through, and it literally guides them to refuge. And when Jim meets Frank, instead of the cynicism that plagues this genre, Jim sees Frank's friendliness and hope, and it reinforces his own search for human connection. He refuses to leave people behind, and that core decency is what makes him stand out. There is a scene in the movie that I think is very powerful, the horses galloping across the green fields. It's a reminder of an untainted nature and a sense of normality that humanity has completely lost. It's a visual juxtaposition to the harsh urban decay, and it tells us that beauty still exists in this world. This all builds to Jim's nightmare of waking up alone again, which powerfully conveys his deepest fear. Make no mistake, after everything he's seen, his biggest terror isn't the infected, it's the agony of isolation. This is why, when he spots that plane in the sky, a powerful symbol of life and hope beyond their quarantined island, his entire arc culminates. This renewed hope leads him to unleash a necessary evil to rescue Selina and Hannah later in the film. And this is where the writing is just so smart. He doesn't just snap and descend into nihilistic rage. No, he becomes a predator lurking in the shadows, a calculated and strategic force. This isn't character assassination, it's a brutal but logical transformation. He comes back from the brink of becoming just like the infected, and in doing so, he holds onto his humanity. It's an act of rescue, not revenge, and that distinction is everything. And to top it all off, the deliberate switch to 35mm film for the ending visually reinforces this shift. It's a much more cinematic look, meant to convey nature and freedom and some kind of hopefulness for Jim's future. It's not just a happy ending for the sake of it, it's an earned one, visually and narratively. And it's a perfect encapsulation of a character arc that, unlike so many we see these days, was treated with respect from start to finish. Now, let's talk about Selina, because honestly, she's one of the main reasons a film like this works so well. When we first meet her, she's presented as completely and utterly focused on survival. She's described as humorless and nihilist. And make no mistake, she is the embodiment of this new, broken world, a stark contrast to Jim's initial, almost naive hope. The film does a great job of using her dialogue to not only give us crucial exposition, but to hammer home her worldview. Staying alive is as good as it gets, she says, and in this world, you can't really blame her for thinking that way. The moment that really defines her character early on comes when Mark is bitten. She doesn't hesitate, there's not a second thought, she just goes at him to prevent the infection from spreading. This is the kind of brutal pragmatism that the later seasons of Game of Thrones or The Walking Dead wish they could write convincingly. But here, it's earned. We find out this ruthlessness comes from a place of genuine trauma, having to kill her own infected parents and brother. It isn't just for shock value, it's a logical, albeit horrifying, adaptation to her reality. It's the foundation of her character. Her dynamic with Jim is where the film's core conflict really shines. Her cynical view that she'd leave them behind in a heartbeat is thrown right up against Jim's desire to believe in people. The filmmaking itself doubles down on this with Dutch angles and framing that physically place them on opposite sides of the argument. It's a visual representation of their clash, his humanity versus her survival instinct. But here's the thing, and it's a sign of some actually really smart writing. For all her talk, she's not as purely selfish as she makes out. We see her put herself in danger for Jim, leading him to thank her for saving his life. And then there's that moment she steals a kiss from him. It's a small crack in the armor she's built up. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, survival isn't the only thing on her mind anymore. This all comes to a head after they meet Frank and Hannah. After spending time with them and experiencing something that feels like a genuine human connection, Selena actually admits she was wrong. She realizes that her belief that survival was as good as it gets was a product of her isolation, and that there's more to it when people can have each other and have a life. This is called character development. We like that. It's a gradual breakdown of her mental barriers, and the film does a good job in making sure it doesn't happen too fast. Now, one of the most interesting and frankly uniquely dark moments for her character comes with the soldiers. Her decision to give Hannah Valium to make her not care about what's about to happen is, well, it's a twisted form of compassion. It's not a heroic, clean choice. It's a pragmatic, brutal, and protective instinct that feels perfectly in line with the person she is, even as she's changing. It's a complex moment that adds a ton of depth to her character. But the real payoff, the moment that brings her entire arc full circle, is after Jim's rampage. After he's brutally killed all the soldiers, Selena has him at her mercy. He's covered in blood, rage-filled, and for all she knows, he could be one of them. She raises her machete, and for a second, you think she's going to revert back to the woman who killed Mark without a second thought, but she hesitates. The hesitation is everything. It's her coming back from the brink, choosing his humanity over the cold logic of survival that she clung to for so long. It's the completion of her arc, and it's done without a single line of cheesy dialogue. In a world of squandered potential and character assassination, Selena's journey is a blueprint for how to do it right. Now, let's talk about Frank. After the tension and the bleak reality of Jim and Selena's journey, we meet Frank. And his introduction with the Christmas lights and the fortified apartment is not just a badass moment, it's a taste of the old world. This guy's not a hardened survivor in the same way Selena is. He's just a guy, a dad who's super friendly and just happy to have some company. His whole demeanor of "this is great" provides such a refreshing contrast to the grim situation that you can't help but like him. Frank represents a brief sense of normality, a safe harbor in a world that's completely gone to hell. And those flashing Christmas lights he uses as a signal, in the middle of this apocalypse, you've got this beacon of enduring hope, acting like a North Star for any other survivors. It's a smart piece of visual storytelling. But the movie doesn't make him perfect, which is what makes him so effective. He's trying his best, but he's not some apocalypse expert. Despite that, he's resourceful. I mean, the guy has a black cab ready to go. And for Jim's arc specifically, Frank is crucial. He becomes this key father figure in the second act of Jim's journey, offering the comfort and sense of family that Jim has been desperately seeking since he found his parents dead. The scene where he comforts Jim after a nightmare really underscores this paternal role he steps into. And that's what makes his death so damn effective. It's devastatingly sudden and completely random. A single drop of infected blood from a crow, and that's it. It's over. And what Brendan Gleeson does in those 20 seconds is incredible. You see Frank's rapid transformation from an apologetic father telling Hannah he loves her after losing his temper to a rageful monster. It's one of the most brutal and effective reminders of just how unforgiving this world is. There's no dramatic speech, no drawn-out sacrifice, Just a single drop and a good man is gone. It's just a perfect gut punch of a scene. Now, that takes us to Hannah. She's introduced as Frank's daughter, and she's the final piece of this makeshift family unit that gives the first half of the movie its heart. Her presence is what allows for these genuinely happy moments to exist. She helps temper the cynicism of the adults, especially Selena, and reminds you that even in an apocalypse, kids can still be kids, at least for a little while. But of course, the world doesn't let that innocence last. The scene where Selena has to give Hannah Valium to protect her from what the soldiers are planning is just tragic. It's a moment that speaks volumes about Selena's own evolving arc and her growing sense of care for Hannah, but it also just highlights Hannah's complete vulnerability. But what I really appreciate is that the film doesn't leave her as just a victim. Her final actions are decisive and honestly pretty unique for a child character in a story like this. After the violation she and Selena faced, she doesn't just run, she gets in the cab and then reverses the damn thing into the mansion to make sure Mela finishes the job. This isn't just a kid lashing out, it's a survivor taking direct, calculated action against the primary human antagonist of the film. Make no mistake, that was a character-defining moment. And in the end, she's one of the 3 survivors. She's there, helping unfurl that giant hello banner in what is a beautiful, hard-won, happy ending. She's not just a survivor, she represents the continuation of hope and the beginning of a new, albeit broken family. It's a fitting end for her character. But now I want to talk about the introduction of the soldiers in 28 Days Later, because it's a masterclass in pulling the rug out from under not just the characters, but the audience as well. We first hear them over the radio promising everything you'd want to hear in an apocalypse: sanctuary, salvation, even a potential cure. It sets up this expectation of a classic rescue, the cavalry arriving just in time, but this movie is way too smart for that. Their actual appearance immediately subverts this. They don't just emerge as saviors, they emerge from the shadows to put down the newly infected Frank, establishing them as this unfeeling, brutally efficient force. It's your first sign that something is just off. And then you have Major West. He initially comes across as this reasonable, almost friendly face, giving Jim a tour of their makeshift fortress, explaining their traps. It's a deceptive front that's meant to put you at ease, but it just makes the eventual reveal all the more disgusting. But this is where the film really shows its hand, and it's with the reveal of Mela. The idea of keeping an infected comrade chained up, supposedly to learn how long the creatures can survive for, is just one of the most uniquely disturbing things I've seen. And look, I'm not the first person to say this, but this isn't just twisted research, it's a chilling commentary on slavery. You have a black man chained and at the complete disposal of a white officer. It's so deliberate, and the fact Mela is the one to eventually kill West is the kind of poetic justice that great writing is built on and earned. We then get to what I like to call the Last Supper scene, which is just filled with these phenomenal little dialogue exchanges that tell you everything you need to know. You have Sergeant Farrell with his bleak, nihilistic worldview on humanity's insignificance, and then West drops his own philosophy, that people killing people is just the state of normality. And he uses this to justify everything they're about to do. It's genius writing because for a moment you almost understand their desperation and their mindset, even as you realize their solutions are just appalling. But any shred of understanding you might have had is just thrown out the window with West's final chilling reveal. I promised them women. Let that sink in. In one line, the soldiers transform from desperate survivors into just disgusting rapists. This is the moment they become the true monsters of the film. This is character assassination, except it's by design. It's meant to show you the absolute worst of humanity, the decay that happens when society collapses. And it just gets better. Farrell's revelation while he's imprisoned that the whole world isn't gone, that Britain has just been quarantined like a diseased little island, is another one of those game-changing moments. It completely reframes the entire scope of the story for both Jim and for us. It's not about the end of the world, it's about being trapped in hell while the world just watches. From that point on, the soldiers solidified their role as a threat that is so much worse than the infected. The infected are mindless, a force of nature. The soldiers are calculated, they're cruel, and they're human. Their execution of Farrell and their relentless hunt for Jim forces him to transform. It makes him become the very thing they've been running from, a predator lurking in the shadows. It's this incredible role reversal, and it's what makes this final act of the film so damn compelling. They didn't just add another zombie, they made the humans the real horror, and that's a creative decision that so many films that came after it just completely failed to understand. So that's 28 days later, and revisiting it now, it's still just staggering how much this movie gets right. What a lot of people need to understand is that 28 Days Later is not a zombie movie. This is not a zombie story. It's a human story that takes place in a world where rage-infected people exist. The infected are a threat, make no mistake, but they're more of a catalyst, a force of nature that pushes our characters to their absolute limits. The real meat and potatoes of this story has nothing to do with them. It's about what happens to people when the rules are gone. And that's why the characters are the heart of this thing. You've got this makeshift family and you get invested in them fast. The film takes its time to make you care, earns your emotional investment. So when things go bad, like Frank's sudden death, it actually means something. It's not just another body dropping for a cheap scare. It's a loss that feels real. I've got to say the writing around the character arcs here is just on another level. Jim's transformation from a lost, vulnerable guy into a predator, it's a brutal but logical evolution driven by the need to protect the people he now considers his family. And Selina's journey from a cold, pragmatic survivalist to someone who chooses humanity over logic is a perfect example of how to break down a character's walls without it feeling forced or rushed. This is called character development. At the end of the day, the true monsters of 28 Days Later aren't the infected, it's the soldiers. It's Major West and his chillingly casual justification for the absolute worst of human behavior. The infected are mindless rage, but the soldiers, their cruelty is calculated. It's a choice, and that choice is what makes this film so much more than just another entry in the genre. It's a blueprint on how to build a world, create characters you actually care about, and then systematically rip it all apart in a way that feels earned. It's a story where every single beat, every single death, and every single moment of hope actually matters. But then we have 28 weeks later, and oh boy. I've talked about downfalls on this channel before, Game of Thrones, Star Wars, but this one hits a little different. Because 28 Weeks Later isn't just a bad sequel, it's a complete and total misunderstanding of everything that made the first film work. The nuance, the psychological horror, the very soul of the original is basically thrown out the window. So you can imagine the excitement when 5 years later a sequel was announced. A chance to expand this terrifying world, to build on the foundations of a classic. But what we got with 28 Weeks Later wasn't an expansion, it was a bit more of a demolition. It's a sequel so bafflingly incompetent, so tonally deaf that it almost feels like an intentional act of sabotage. This movie isn't just a step down from the original, it's a fall off a cliff into an abyss of generic brain-dead horror tropes. Recently, Alex Garland was on a YouTube video where he talked about some of his most iconic films, and he spent ages talking about 28 Days Later, but when it came to 28 Weeks Later, he said about 3 things and then went on to the next movie. It's actually kind of funny. Now, a big part of the problem is immediately obvious here. The original creative team of Danny Boyle and Alex Garland are gone, and in their place, we get a committee of writers who seem to have misunderstood every single thing that made the first film brilliant. The original was a deeply personal journey of survival. The sequel, on the other hand, feels like it was written by throwing darts at a board of horror cliches. We go from the nuanced, character-driven dread of the original to a film that seems to think being cool and edgy just means being relentlessly bleak for no reason. It strips away all the hope and leaves you in this empty void of despair, not because it has a point to make, but because it thinks that's what a dark movie is supposed to do. But the real crime here is the script. Characters in this movie make decisions that are so monumentally stupid and so utterly devoid of logic that it shatters any immersion you might have. You have the military, supposedly securing an entire district, operating with the security level of a local shopping mall. You have 2 kids being allowed to just wander off into a hazardous zone because the plot needs them to. It's not character motivation, it's the writers moving chess pieces around with zero regard for whether it makes a lick of sense. And then there's Don, the film's main character, who is suddenly a super intelligent predator who can outsmart military patrols and hunt his own children. Are you kidding me? This completely contradicts the entire established lore of the infected being mindless, rage-driven machines. It's a change that exists for no other reason than to give the film a villain, and in doing so, it just ruins the fundamental terror of the virus itself. Honestly, rewatching this movie is a frustrating experience because it feels like a sequel to any other zombie film with no real connection to the masterpiece that came before it. The shaky cam, once a stylistic choice to create a sense of raw panic, is now just an overused crutch to hide bad action choreography. It's a story of wasted potential at its most insulting. So we're going to get into that. We're going to break down this sequel piece by piece and figure out how a follow-up to one of the greatest films of the 21st century went so catastrophically wrong. So after Danny Boyle and Alex Garland absolutely knocked it out of the park with 28 Days Later, you'd think their first order of business would be to dive straight back into that world, but no. Instead, they went off to make a sci-fi thriller called Sunshine. Now, during the making of Sunshine, they did start brainstorming what a sequel could look like, and honestly, one of their initial ideas 29 days later about a team of British Marines trying to rescue the Queen during the initial outbreak, that actually sounds kind of cool. It has that raw, chaotic energy of the first film, but of course, they didn't do that. They decided to frame it as an aftermath set long after the outbreak, with an attempt to rebuild London. And to make it sound more profound than it was all meant to be some grand metaphor for the war on terror. Because nothing says subtle allegory like a zombie sequel. Real original take. And this is where the first real cracks in the foundation started to show. People were hyped to jump back into this world, but Boyle, being tied up with Sunshine, had to step back from the director's chair. So he suggested Juan Carlos Fresnadillo, I can't pronounce that, a guy who made a unique film about trading luck. He was a fresh voice, he said, so Boyle took on the crushy role of executive producer. Though he did swoop in to direct some second unit stuff, including that incredible opening scene, which is easily the best scene of the film, it's almost as if he wanted to show everyone how it should be done before handing over the reins. And despite landing a solid cast with guys like Robert Carlyle, Idris Elba, and Jeremy Renner, the whole production was apparently centered around finding the two kids, because what this gritty, terrifying survival horror franchise really needed was a family drama at its core. Great. Unlike the first film's raw, terrifying DV cam aesthetic, 28 Weeks Later was shot on a mix of 16mm, 35mm, and digital, backed by a bigger budget. And what does a bigger budget mean in Hollywood? It means more action, bigger scale, and less of the nail-biting tension that made the original a masterpiece. The quiet, intimate horror was one of the first things to go out of the window because more explosions equals good, apparently. They even hired ballet dancers and gymnasts to play the infected, giving them this orchestra of screams, which sounds cool on paper, but it was just the beginning of the problems. But let's talk about the shaky cam in this film, because my god, the shaky cam. It was so overused and excessive that it went from being an immersive tool to just being straight up annoying. It felt like I was watching the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. It felt less like an artistic choice to convey chaos and more like a cheap trick to save money or hide dodgy choreography. It was just insulting. But the biggest crime of this movie, the thing that just completely misunderstands what came before, was what they did with the infected, specifically with Don. In the first film, they are mindless, instinct-driven rage machines. That's the entire point. But here, Don gets infected and suddenly he has the cunning of a Bond villain, intelligently stalking his own children in a way that just spits in the face of the established law. This isn't a clever twist, it's character assassination of the entire concept. It just breaks the damn rules of the universe they created. And the plot holes, like, are you kidding me? The kids just waltz back into the most dangerous quarantine zone on the planet with ease. Don, a civilian maintenance worker, has a magic keycard that gets him into top secret facilities. The security around the single most dangerous person in the country is so laughably incompetent it makes the stormtroopers in Star Wars look like Navy SEALs. The second you give anything in this movie any thought at all, you quickly realize it totally falls apart. And to top it all off, they just had to bring back the eye gouge scene. It was a brutal, shocking moment in the first film, but here, it just felt like gleeful violence, completely stripped of its original context and weight. The craziest thing is, the movie was still a financial success. It made over $64 million on a $15 million budget, proving once again that just because your movie makes $1 billion, or in this case, a healthy profit, it doesn't make it a good movie. And it's no surprise that despite talks of a third film happening immediately after its release, it's taken them almost 2 decades to get a sequel off the ground with 28 years later. Let that sink in. That kind of development hell doesn't happen when a franchise is healthy. It's a sign that even back then, something had gone fundamentally, disastrously wrong. Alright, let's get into the characters, because this is where a story that had some potential just completely falls apart at the seams. It's just a collection of individuals who are either making the absolute dumbest decisions imaginable, are victims of some of the most frustrating writing I've seen, or in some cases, both. It's a perfect storm of incompetence and wasted potential, and it's just staggering to look back on, and it all starts with Don. The film kicks off with what is, to be fair, an incredible opening sequence. Don, his wife Alice, and a few other survivors are holed up in a farmhouse. And when the infected inevitably overrun the place, Don makes a split-second decision that defines his entire character. He abandons his wife, leaving her to be torn apart whilst he sprints to safety. Now, some people might try to argue this is just a realistic human instinct, a moment of pure self-preservation, and sure, maybe. But let's be real, the movie frames this as the ultimate act of moral failure. The kind of cowardice that just stains a character permanently. He doesn't just run, he slams the door on her face. This isn't just survival. This is a full-blown character assassination right out of the gate. So after the outbreak is seemingly contained, we catch up with Don in the rebuilt safe zone in London. And this is where the logic just starts to fall off a cliff. He somehow landed a job as a section officer with what has to be the most convenient, top-level security clearance in cinematic history. Like, are you kidding me? This is the guy who just watched his wife get eaten alive because he was too scared to help, and they decide to give him the keys to the kingdom. It makes absolutely no sense, but it's a necessary plot device so he can inevitably screw everything up later. On top of that, he lies to his kids, Tammy and Andy, telling them their mother died instantly, completely papering over the fact he left her for dead. So not only is he a coward, he's a manipulative liar too. Great start. And this is where the character's IQ just plummets into the negative. His kids sneak out, find their mother Alice, who, surprise, is alive and an asymptomatic carrier of the virus. When she's brought back and put into quarantine, Don uses his magic security pass to go see her, and in this moment, a moment that requires even a shred of common sense, Don, in his infinite wisdom, decides the best course of action is to give her a passionate kiss. Let that sink in. His wife, who he last saw being swarmed by rage-fueled zombies, is now a known carrier of that same virus, and his reaction is to swap saliva with her. This single act of sheer, unadulterated stupidity is what brings the entire safe zone and London crashing down. It's not tragic, it's just dumb. It's like his cowardice created a debt that could only be repaid with galaxy brain levels of idiocy. The second he's infected, the film just goes full on shock value. He doesn't just kill Alice, he brutally murders her by gouging her eyes out with his thumbs. Now, this is meant to echo what Jim did in the first film, a callback to show the unbridled rage of the virus, but here, it just feels unearned. It's less of a moment of character consistency and more just gratuitous violence to show us how evil he's become. Like, we get it, he's the bad guy now. You didn't need to turn him into a glee-filled monster in 5 seconds flat. And from here on out, the movie's own rules just get thrown out the window for the one specific character. Don becomes this zombie Jason Bourne. He's not a mindless, rage-fueled infected like every other one we've seen. No, he's a tactical genius. He stalks his own children with a level of cunning and stealth that makes no sense. He maneuvers strategically. He even seems to hesitate and recognize his kids for a moment. It's a completely different set of rules for one character because the plot suddenly needs a main antagonist instead of just a terrifying force of nature. It's lazy writing, plain and simple. You can't establish a threat with a clear set of behaviors and then just change it for your main character because you wrote yourself into a corner. So Don goes on a rampage, single-handedly orchestrating chaos and even hunting down and killing Major Scarlet by beating her to death with a sniper rifle, just in case you forgot he was the big bad of the movie. His downfall finally comes when his daughter, Tammy, shoots him to save her brother. And I guess this is supposed to be this big moment of justice for his earlier cowardice, a fitting end. But by this point, the character is so inconsistently written that his death is more of a relief than a poignant conclusion. Don from 28 Weeks Later is a perfect example of wasted potential. He starts as a very fascinating study in cowardice and moral failure, but he devolves into a contrived plot device, a super zombie with his own set of rules, and a villain whose actions are driven by moments of baffling stupidity. He's a walking, talking, eye-gouging plot hole, and a frustrating blemish. But now let's talk about Alice, Tammy, and Andy. At the very beginning of this whole mess, Alice is abandoned by her husband, Don, and I don't mean he just runs off. We see her screaming for his help as he leaves her to be dragged away by the infected. He literally leaves her to die. This is a brutal, traumatic moment that is supposed to define her character. Keep that in mind, because it's very important later. Months go by, and what do you know, Alice is found alive, but not just alive, she is, of course, a unique asymptomatic carrier of the rage virus, because of course she is. While she doesn't show symptoms, the virus is just chilling in her blood and saliva, making her a biological time bomb. This genetic anomaly, which is pure plot convenience. By the way, immediately puts her in the crosshairs of the military, who, with some actual common sense, want to kill her to stop the virus from ever getting out again. But then we get the reunion with Don, and in a moment of, forgiveness? She kisses him. She kisses the man who left her for dead, and in doing so, she inadvertently infects him. This single action becomes the catalyst for the entire new outbreak that destroys the safe zone. Now, some people will argue that her expression in this scene hints that she might have known exactly what she was doing, that this was actually revenge. And let's be honest, that actually makes more sense than her being so monumentally dumb as to not consider the risks. But what's her reward for this? She gets brutally killed by the now infected Don, the very man she just doomed. It's just a harsh, undignified end that's a direct consequence of the chaos she, intentionally or not, unleashed. Like, what a waste. But oh, it gets dumber. This brings us to the kids, Tammy and Andy, who are basically a blueprint on how not to survive an apocalypse. Let's start with Tammy. Despite clear, repeated military warnings and despite her own father lying to them about their mother's fate, she decides the most important thing to do right now is to sneak her younger brother Andy outside the secure zone, to their old, unsecured, and almost certainly crawling with infected house. And for what? To retrieve a photo. A goddamn photo. This isn't a lapse in judgment. This is a level of stupidity that is honestly insulting to the audience. This single decision born out of pure narrative contrivance is what directly exposes them to extreme danger and sets up their entire conflict of the movie. And if you thought that was bad, just wait for the finale. At the end of the film, Tammy straight up deceives the helicopter pilot Flynn about Andy being infected. She tells him Doyle didn't make it, but she carefully, deliberately shields Andy's bite from the view. She convinces Flynn to evacuate them, knowing full well her brother is a ticking time bomb. This one selfish, catastrophic lie is what ultimately allows the virus to breach quarantine and spread to mainland Europe. So, good job, Tammy. You just doomed the entire continent for a keepsake. But finally, we have poor Andy, the unwitting instrument of global Armageddon. His whole motivation is this deep emotional need for a photo of his mother because he's afraid of forgetting her face. Which, is tragic, but it's also the emotional leverage Tammy uses to kickstart their suicide mission. He is then, in a uniquely personal and horrifying twist, directly attacked and bitten by his own rage-infected father in some dark subway tunnels. Like, the trauma here is off the charts. And then in a twist of genetic fate that just screams lazy writing, he's also an asymptomatic carrier, just like his mother. What are the odds? This genetic lottery ticket means he gets to survive the bite, but it also turns him into the ultimate super spreader. His successful escape to France, made possible by Tammy's lie, is what directly leads to the virus crossing the English Channel and overrunning Paris. And from there, presumably, the rest of the world. He becomes the single most catastrophic figure in the entire story, and he doesn't even know it. So to recap, one person's questionable revenge, another's baffling stupidity, and a kid's grief all conspire to bring about the end of the world. It's just a masterclass in characters making the dumbest possible decisions at every single turn. It's just so insane to me. Okay, now we have Major Scarlet, a character who is supposedly the smart, scientific voice of reason in this whole mess. Except her reason and any semblance of logic she brings to the table gets thrown out the window at every single turn. Her superiors just wave off her legitimate concerns about bringing children into what is obviously an unsafe zone. It's a textbook example of setting a character up to be the intelligent one, only to have her be completely ignored by everyone around her just so the plot can happen. And then you have her run in with General Stone. She lays out a logical, scientific argument for why Alice is valuable, how she could be the literal key to a cure for all of humanity. And Stone's response is basically, yeah, whatever, execute her. This is the moment the story just tells you, don't bother with thinking or science. We're going to just do this with brute force because it looks cooler on screen. It's a complete abandonment of any narrative stakes. So after being sidelined and ignored, she gets shot in the leg because, of course she does. And her eventual death after all that, after being the one voice of sanity, she gets brutally beaten to death in a subway tunnel with a sniper rifle. To call her death underwhelming is the understatement of the century. It's violent, sure, but it feels so pointless and so unearned. What a complete and utter waste of a character who could have actually mattered. Let's talk about Sergeant Doyle. The writer's idea of compelling character arcs here is to introduce him as this completely obnoxious, kind of racist sniper who spies on people for fun. Yeah, that's our starting point here. But this is one of the few Jeremy Renner performances where he doesn't just come off as a bravado douchebag. Here he's especially likable because he becomes the actual moral heart of the film. This was pre-Fame Renner, so he isn't amplified to any degree, but he gets the leader status boost in the second half after he has a complete moral breakdown. His commander orders him to execute every single civilian, infected or not, and instead of just following orders like a mindless drone, he abandons his post to save a handful of survivors. He's the complete antithesis to the soldiers from the first film, who became these morally depraved monsters. Doyle sees all the chaos and tragedy and actually becomes more human, turning into this fatherly figure. And for all his trouble for finally doing the right thing, he gets one of the most painfully grim, truly devastating deaths. That scene of him pushing the car so Scarlett and the kids can escape, only to be set ablaze by those scorched earth bastards, it's just, they built up this nice character arc and then just incinerated him in the most agonizing way possible. Like, god damn it, it hurts. And as for General Stone, this guy is the embodiment of every terrible, one-dimensional military trope rolled into one. The fact his decision to immediately kill Alice, the only potential cure for the human race, is just baffling. You have the literal key to saving the world in front of you, and this guy's plan is to put a bullet in her head. It makes no sense. It's just a complete abandonment of any narrative nuance for the sake of having a hard-ass general. But that's just the appetizer. His masterstroke is ordering his soldiers to massacre civilians, infected and uninfected alike. A move so monumentally stupid and evil that it's almost a parody of a villain. And the punchline to this whole joke of a character? His strategy completely fails anyway. The infected just spill out into London, proving his entire philosophy was not only morally bankrupt, but also tactically inept. It's just a perfect encapsulation of the story's logic. Go for the most extreme, the most idiotic option, have it all fail spectacularly, and then just move on. And finally, we've got Flynn, the helicopter pilot. His entire character motivation is basically, I'm just following orders, which has to be the laziest writing trope in the book. He's so rigid that his refusal to just take the damn people leads directly to a stranger named Sam grabbing onto the helicopter and dying a completely pointless death. And don't even get me started on the helicopter blender move to obliterate the horde. It's so ludicrously over the top that it pulls you right out of the movie. It's just the kind of thing you'd see in a Sharknado sequel, not something that's meant to be taken seriously. And his final contribution? He fails. Miserably. He abandons his chopper in Paris, and we hear a distress call implying that his actions have just helped spread the virus across the entire continent, maybe the world. So the one guy who was obsessed with following the rules and just sticking to the mission ends up being a key player in causing the global apocalypse. Just another character arc that goes absolutely nowhere. A fitting end for this mess, I guess. So, revisiting 28 weeks later is always an interesting experience. This is the sequel that got the full-blown Hollywood treatment in every sense of the word. Bigger budget, bigger stars. I mean, you've got Jeremy Renner and Idris Elba in there, but to say it was a notable step down in quality from the original would be the understatement of the century. And I don't think many people would argue with that. Danny Boyle and Alex Garland stepping back to executive producer roles is felt in every single frame of this movie, and it shows. The biggest difference here is the tone. The first film was this haunting, almost poetic story about finding a sliver of hope in absolute despair. This movie starts bleak, gives you a fraudulent glimpse of hope, and then just dives headfirst into an even bleaker, more cynical nihilism and never comes up for air. It completely lacks that poetic quality Boyle brought to the table, and instead offers a much more straightforward, grim, and honestly less intelligent experience. Now, I do have to give credit where credit is due. The movie does have its strong points, and I'm not going to pretend like it doesn't. The opening scene, it's genuinely one of the best cold opens in horror history, maybe even film history. I'd put it right up there with the prologue of The Two Towers. It's a masterclass in tension, perfectly showing how quickly everything can go to absolute hell, and it sets an unbelievably stressful tone for what's to come. And Jeremy Renner as Doyle has a legitimately great character arc. He goes from this by-the-books kind of unlikable soldier to a true hero who sacrifices himself to save the civilians. That's some solid writing right there. But that's pretty much where the good stuff ends because, man, from there, a lot of the things just went very, very wrong. As for the things it gets wrong, let's just start with the character of Don after he gets infected. The fact he is basically just turning into some kind of tactical zombie Jason Bourne is just like, what? He's actively hunting his kids, showing strategy and memory. This completely shatters the entire concept of the rage virus from the first film. They're meant to be mindless engines of pure unthinking rage, not super stalkers with a personal vendetta. It just breaks the logic of the entire world for the sake of a convenient antagonist. And the military's incompetence in this movie is just off the charts. You lock all the civilians in an underground car park with one exit and then turn the power off? What were they thinking? And the code red order to shoot everything that moves, that's not a strategy. That's just barbarism for the sake of looking hardcore and creating chaos on screen. And the shaky cam. And also, don't get me started on that helicopter scene. Ultimately, the film feels like a case of cargo cult horror. The filmmakers copied all the surface level elements of the original, the rage virus, the bleak setting, the shaky cam, without understanding the soul of what made it work. It took a smart, profound, and character-driven horror film and turned it into generic genre slop for an audience that just wants to see blood and guts. It's the Hollywood sequel machine at its worst, stripping a unique idea of its intelligence and just leaving the gory shell behind. And to me, that's the biggest crime of all. So to wrap it all up, 28 Days Later is, and let's be honest here, a masterpiece. It's a film that completely redefined a genre and proved that you could make a zombie movie that was smart, terrifying, and had something to say. It was bold, it was innovative, and it was made with a soul. It's a stark reminder of what happens when you let talented people just create. 28 weeks later, on the other hand, that's a different story. Look, it's not a complete and utter train wreck. That opening scene, make no mistake, one of the most intense and brilliantly executed sequences in any horror film, period. But after that, the film just loses the magic of the original completely. It becomes more standard, more predictable, and frankly a whole lot dumber. It's like if they made The Godfather and then followed it up with a generic straight-to-DVD gangster shoot-'em-up. You can watch it, sure, but it's just not the same thing. And I think that's the core of the issue here. 28 Weeks Later is a textbook example of what happens when a studio sees a successful film and decides to squeeze every last dollar out of it, without actually understanding what made it great in the first place. The nuance, the character depth, the slow-burning dread. It's all just thrown out the window for more action and more formulaic horror beats. It's a serviceable action flick at worst, I guess, but it's a terrible sequel to 28 Days Later. But with 28 Years Later releasing, which I haven't actually seen yet, I'm cautiously optimistic. The fact that Boyle and Garland are back gives me a sliver of hope that they can recapture the original magic. By the way, feel free to share your thoughts on the new film in the comments below, but I'm begging you, try and keep it a little bit spoiler-free. And I want to ask you guys, what's your take on 28 Days Later and 28 Years Later? Was 28 Weeks Later an underrated sequel that gets too much hate? Or was it a massive disappointment that tarnished the original's legacy? Let me know down in the comments below. And of course, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on what's next, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.